You don't need a stage to be a teacher, and you don't need a classroom to learn what really matters. What if the greatest lessons in life didn't come from books, but from exile, hunger, and hardship? What if real philosophy didn't begin with words, but with what you do when life falls apart? That's the world of Musonius Rufus. No lecture halls, no ivory towers, just a man stripped of luxury, stripped of safety, yet still rich in virtue. A man who didn't just talk about philosophy, he lived it when it was hardest to live. He didn't write lengthy books or seek fame in Roman forums. His teachings didn't echo from golden halls. Instead, they whispered from exile, echoed through manual labor, and rang out in the quiet strength of daily consistency. Musonius believed that Stoic philosophy wasn't something to admire, it was something to do. Born in the first century AD, Musonius Rufus wasn't trying to become a legend. And yet he became the silent architect behind one of Stoicism's greatest voices, Epictetus. That's how enduring his influence was, not because he commanded attention, but because he shaped others with depth and precision, like a sculptor working patiently in stone. He once said, "One ought to practice philosophy above all things, for it is the only way to live well." But he didn't just preach that idea. He carried it into exile under Emperor Nero, where many would have broken. Musonius didn't. Banished to a desolate island cut off from Roman society, he didn't sulk. He planted. He tilled the earth with bare hands. He shared food. He mentored strangers. And he never stopped embodying the values he taught. He didn't curse fate. He didn't demand pity. He responded with quiet resilience, the kind that doesn't scream but radiates like warmth through a cold wall. He taught through silence and sweat that virtue begins not in lofty speech but in action. That who you are when no one sees, that's the truest test. In a world that now drowns in advice, productivity hacks, and inspirational sound bites, Musonius gives us something painfully rare, a call to live what we claim to believe. If you have learned to live according to nature, he said, then let your deeds, not your words, be the proof. Think about that. Every day we scroll past quotes about wisdom, strength, and purpose. We nod. Maybe we repost. But do we practice even one of those truths? When we're tired, angry, or unseen, Musonius did, and not just in times of ease. He believed hardship wasn't a detour from philosophy. It was the very ground it walked on. He once wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." For him, adversity wasn't an obstacle, it was the forge. And that's why he trained women in philosophy alongside men, something revolutionary in his time. He saw no gender divide in the soul's capacity for virtue. Every person he believed deserved a chance to grow stronger, clearer, more courageous, not through inspiration alone, but through disciplined living. Musonius didn't romanticize suffering, but he recognized its power. Pain strips away pretense. Hunger teaches restraint. Silence carves space for clarity. So he emphasized the simplest things: what you eat, how you sleep, how you treat your body, how you speak to others. These weren't trivial details, they were the proving grounds of character. He said practice in the daily tasks of life is more important than listening to lectures. And that's why for Musonius, even washing your hands or sharing a crust of bread could be an act of philosophy if done with intention and dignity. You see, we often imagine Stoics as marble statues, frozen in thought, gazing into eternity. But Musonius, he walked barefoot, he tended gardens, he lived simply. He taught not from behind a desk, but from wherever he stood. His life wasn't a performance, it was a presence. When we think of Stoic leadership, names like Marcus Aurelius or Cato the Younger come to mind, men at the helm of empires. But Musonius, he offers something quieter, yet just as powerful. He shows us how to lead not armies, but ourselves, how to govern our impulses, how to stay firm in truth, even when it costs us comfort. How to remain kind even when the world is not. In every small act of consistency, Musonius led. And maybe that's the leadership we're most starved for today. Not louder voices, but steadier souls. Not more content, but more character. Imagine a life where strength wasn't measured by dominance, but by self-restraint. Where success wasn't applause, but integrity. Where courage looked like being honest when it's inconvenient, generous when no one's watching, calm when everything inside you wants to react. Musonius doesn't thunder, he doesn't dazzle. He simply whispers, "Live the way you speak." And that whisper, it lingers, especially now in an age where it's easy to look wise online but avoid the work of actually becoming wise in real life. If you're trying to lead a team, a family, or just yourself, you don't need to memorize speeches. You need to master your habits. You need to become the kind of person whose actions carry more authority than any title ever could. Because real influence isn't built on charisma. It's built on consistency, on how you act when it's raining, when you're broke, when no one claps, when the only reward is peace in your own conscience. That's where Musonius's legacy lives, not in stone monuments, but in every person who chooses discipline over indulgence, kindness over cruelty, courage over convenience. It lives in the teachings of Epictetus. It lives in that moment when you wake up early, not because it's easy, but because it's right. It lives in silence, in restraint, in the decision to do one good thing well again and again. And it lives today in those who quietly carry Stoic philosophy not as theory, but as practice, not as branding, but as identity. You don't need to renounce your life or flee to the wilderness, but you do need to begin somewhere honest. Maybe that's speaking up kindly. Maybe it's taking care of your body. Maybe it's forgiving someone, or staying calm, or choosing humility when you'd rather win. Because Musonius's philosophy is painfully simple. Don't talk about it, live it. So now I'll ask you the same thing. He would have asked his students not with a lecture, but with a look. Are your actions aligned with your beliefs? Not perfectly, but truly. Because Stoic philosophy isn't about being flawless. It's about being faithful to your principles, to your practice, and to the kind of person you're becoming. That's where strength begins. Not in words, but in work. And maybe, just maybe, that's where your leadership begins too. So if this message stirred something in you, don't just share it. Live it. Start where you are. Pick one action today that reflects the life you want to lead. Let your life, not your timeline, be the proof. And if you want more real-world reflections on Stoic philosophy, grounded leadership, and timeless wisdom that meets the modern world, subscribe to Stoic Leadership Insights. New episodes every week. Until then, walk with presence, lead with silence, and remember, the most powerful voice is the one backed by action.